So let's start by introducing ourselves. My name's Eric.
Okay, and I'm Krystal.
Hi, Krystal.
Hi, Eric.
What do you think happens when we die?
Good question. I honestly have no idea other than that we go into complete and unconditional love.
It's a good way
We
of
just
looking at it.
love. Yeah.
Interesting. One of my favorite speakers, Alan Watts, he says, I don't know what happens after I'll die, but I know it's gonna be basically the same as what it was like before I was born. And
Yeah, right?
you won't be there to be afraid of it or to resent it or avoid it. It's just gonna
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. It's really like I can say, I'm just looking at the date today and it's 444. So it's 2404.
Ooh.
Synchronicities.
And we're
Uh
starting at 4 p.m.
yeah, exactly.
And if I'm not mistaken, I was exactly 4 minutes late. So it was 4:04 when I sent you the invite.
Yeah, there's no coincidences.
Fancy. So you're pretty up to date with certain symbolisms like that. So what would you interpret the number four to be? What's the spiritual significance of four?
I honestly, I just look it up when the numbers come up to me. So I haven't gotten it embedded in my brain, but I can look in my book quickly if you want.
Yeah, it's up to you if you think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I think it would because it gives us that symbolism. Um, yeah, I have a hard time retaining things in my brain. So when I see numbers, I usually just I Google it, and then I'm
That's
like, but then the message that or whatever comes up is a message for me. That's what I take it as. So I'll search what does the significance of 44444 mean? And then it comes up. And it's funny because this week I've been seeing triple digits of four. And then we happened to be meeting today. And you just
ooh.
asked me about death.
Is it
Life
odd or
and death.
is it God?
I think it's God. Um, here, just quickly see if it comes up. Here it is. It's time to leverage your gifts and talents. So if 444 is making an appearance in your life, this is a call to spiritual awakening and an opportunity for manifestation. Use the gifts you have been given as you have received encouragement to keep going and work hard to overcome the obstacles you may be facing. Cool,
Interesting.
right?
Is that relevant in your life right now?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah. Starting
I
this
think,
business and how about you?
yeah, I'd say that's pretty relevant too. I mean, as you know, this is we're still in the very early phases of this podcast as a whole.
Yeah.
And with the seasons changing, I have to make a significant career choice in the next couple days or weeks here. So
Yeah.
we'll see how things go in that direction as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. Same with me, like everything's aligned up to this point, and now I have to put in the more effort and work um to move forward with said goals. But I also feel a bit I feel a bit of fear and like imposter syndrome coming through and that kind of thing that it can just try to keep me complacent, but I'm not going to continue in that realm anymore. That's like the old me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I do want to talk about the business that you're starting. But first, did you mention that your kid asked you about death today?
No,
No? What? I
no,
swear I heard you say something about death before we went off on a tangent here, right before you pulled out the book.
I did say I said that it was interesting that you had mentioned like what happens to you after you
Oh,
die, but I said death. The way that I said it came out as death. Yeah.
okay. Fair enough. Okay. Another thing I can relate to, I just want to throw this out there, is how you said that you have a hard time retaining information because we have all this information just available to us. And I can relate to that too, because why would we even need to retain information when we have access to the whole world at our fingertips all the time? I feel like that's
Right?
really interfered with that ability of ours.
Yeah, it really has, and that's why I went and bought this book, The Spiritual. You can't see it because I got the blur on him in my bedroom, but it's the spiritual meaning of numbers, so that I can actually like, I don't know. I mean, I still read on Google, but I just like to have a little bit more in depth.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's nice to get away from the screens every now and again too, because I mean,
yeah,
with that access to all this information just as quickly as we want it, we've also entered into an age of what's called digital dementia,
oh yeah,
which is since we have all this access to information, we don't need to remember anything. And I think the biggest way that this influence impacts my life is navigation. Just
yeah.
relying on Google Maps all the time has made it nearly impossible for me to retain directions whenever I don't have Google Maps. I could take the same route 100 times and I'll still have to use the map every time.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I relate to that so much. I'm
Yeah.
the same way. Even when I drive somewhere, like you said, 100 times, I still have to rely on that map to get me home
Yeah.
to like a certain spot, and then I'm like, okay, I know where I'm at now. But
Yeah.
it's so silly. Yeah.
Yeah, so lately I've been trying to avoid using maps for every single navigation and trying to rely on my sense of direction instead. And I've been
Yep.
noticing that over time I've been kind of regaining that ability back. And I think it's interesting because they did a study on bus drivers and cab drivers. And the cab drivers, they did brain scans on a bunch of them, and the cab drivers have the part of their brain that's responsible for spatial awareness. I believe it's the
Yep.
hippocampus was much larger and more developed than bus drivers. Even though bus drivers had to navigate the city, they navigated the same route every time, whereas cab drivers had to do different routes and they had to
Right.
figure out where they're going on the fly. And so the part of their brain responsible for that grew substantially.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's just
Wow.
a modern demonstration of neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Neuroplasticity. I love that.
Yeah. But we're not here to talk about me. You have a very fascinating story, and that's why I'm very excited to have you as a guest. So first off, your business. What is this business that you're starting, if you care to share that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm starting a wellness counseling and life skills coaching practice. So that incorporates mind, body, and spiritual healing, and with as well as Reiki. So Reiki energy healing, and I'll be doing teaching Reiki classes as well. So it's pretty exciting to get
Fascinating.
started. Yeah.
Yeah. And this, you're just at the beginning stages of this.
I am, yeah. So I'm just in my practicum right now, and it's pretty awesome that, I mean, when I think of it, yeah, I paid for this program, and now for the end of it, I get to build my business. So I had the choice of either going to work somewhere and offer counseling services somewhere else or build my business, and I chose to do it this way because if I didn't, I wouldn't do it. So
Yeah, and you didn't just pay with your money, but you paid with your time and your effort as well.
yeah, exactly. So and there was like so much stuff that happened this year, but it was it aligned so well that like it was meant to happen. That's what I believe. Sorry, I have a hair on my face. It's like tickling me.
Oh,
Um,
that's the camera's not picking it up.
I know it's just tickling me. But yeah, I believe that it was, divinely timed, as one would say.
Okay. So, what would you say your spirituality is based on? Do you have a Christian background, or would this be more of some Eastern spirituality like Buddhism or Taoism?
I think it's just an open-mindedness to um energies, to life force energy. I don't really have a Christian background or anything like that. I did become a born again Christian this past year. I sorry, last year. I didn't even know, honestly, if I can be honest here, what the heck was happening. I thought I was
Okay.
going into the room to have some prayers said over me, and they're like, "Oh, now do you accept God into your life?" And I was like, "Yes." And they're like, "You've been a born again Christian," and I was like, "What just happened?" So, yeah,
Interesting.
for me, yeah, it's just like an open-mindedness of that, like we're these weird beings on this earth. Like I feel like this may sound really weird, but I feel like we're the aliens. Like,
Ooh,
yeah,
that's a hot take.
yeah, they do. I told my kids that too. I was like, we're the aliens here.
Well, it's interesting because there's a theory where we're born as a slave race created by the Nephilim, who came here from the only planet that's orbiting in the opposite direction from the other nine, I believe it is. But we our current astronomers don't recognize that planet because or know that it exists right now because it's currently on the other side of the sun. And I'm just repeating what I said, so I have no I'm not saying my stance is for or against this theory, but
Right.
I think it's interesting that you say that we're the aliens, because that's a theory is that we came here and we were bred by an alien species.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole other topic I'm sure we can get into.
Yeah, yeah. On it,
Yeah.
if you want to get into that, there's this book called "The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life" by Drunvalo Melchizedek. And if you want to practice open-mindedness, that's a good way to practice because you have to go into that read with such an open mind because there's some um what's the word I'm looking for? It's gonna stretch the boundaries of your open-mindedness.
Okay, I'm writing it down right now. I'm gonna check it out. Thank you for that.
Cool. Strongly recommend it. So, with you being a born again Christian, that means you believe in the existence of Jesus.
I believe, yes, I believe that there is a God. Sort that's a good question. I
If I
mean,
get too personal, you don't have to answer anything you don't feel like answering. And if you feel like you haven't developed an opinion that you want to share, you can abstain from sharing an answer as well.
yeah, I think in that sense, like I haven't developed an opinion on that as of Jesus per se. So I believe that there's a God. There's like universal life force energy. There's the divine. There's like oneness, but I don't know if I believe that it was Jesus. You know what I mean? So
That's fair, but you're open to the possibility of it.
I'm open to the possibility, of course. Yeah.
Interesting. And so I think that's a good exercise or practice of your open-mindedness.
Yes.
Because I'm the same way, and I think you've heard me joke about the concept that me and my God have an open relationship. Because
Yes.
some days when I pray to Jesus. Some days when I pray, it's to the faceless karmic energy of the universe. Some days it's to Buddha, and some days I'm just trying to focus the energy within my own cells.
Right.
Be but I don't take a firm stance for or against any religion, and I think that all of them or most of them are right in some regard, but I don't think any of them are 100% right.
Right. Exactly. Because I mean, who are we to say when we
That's exactly
don't
it.
really know, right? We're not seeing it. We can see the books and we can see there's history. But who's to say that that is actually legitimate history, right? So there's so many what ifs when it comes to that that I'm like, I'll just keep an open mind.
That's exactly it. I firmly believe that it's not my place to decide if there is or isn't a God or what he looks like or what he or what happened in which book, right? I
Exactly.
do, however, think that it's interesting that in most of the major religions, there's a bunch of uncanny similarities. Like they all have a great flood. They all have an immaculate conception with a virgin birth. They all have a death followed by a resurrection 3 days later.
Yeah.
And they all have a form of the seven or however many great plagues. And so, and it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, these religions were conceived by different people in different parts of the world in different periods, at a time when there was no possible way for them to have communicated with each other. So, how did they come
Right.
up with a similar story?
Right. Yeah,
Isn't that
exactly. No,
weird?
that's that's what gets me, right? That's where I'm like, how is this possible?
Yeah,
And it makes me question, right? Because where was the communication back then? How can they have that said form of communication? Even with like just thinking like the Bible's been created, right? And these all these texts and stuff like that. But yeah, how did they do that back then? Right?
Yeah, weird.
So interesting.
But what brings me a little bit of comfort, and I don't know if you can relate, I kind of stand on the border of science and faith. So I like to find an explanation that satisfies the prerequisites of both. Right. And so there's a like one of the fundamental laws of physics or nature, what have you, is that matter or sorry, energy can't be created or destroyed. It only changes forms. And so
Right,
that's kind of gotten me to start thinking of the idea of reincarnation in a sense that we don't necessarily die and then our soul leaves the body and then enters into another single body and then we live it through that body with our existing soul. But what I
right.
think is since the energy is stored within our cells, it's possible that we die, our cells break down into the earth, into grass that feeds the rabbits, which then feeds the wolf, and it's spread apart. So instead of being reincarnated into one being, we're now
Yep.
reincarnated. Our energy is divided amongst all of these beings, and now a piece of our soul is in all of these beings that it trickles down into.
Oh, that's such an interesting perspective. I've never heard of that kind of perspective before, but it makes sense.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we go somewhere, right? Like our souls are, yeah, I feel like our souls, like how do people communicate after they've passed away with other people, right? And then where does that energy go? So I think that's a
Exactly.
really cool perspective. Yeah.
Thanks. Like the one thing that I really like to believe and something I have a hard time letting go of is that I think that I think of the universe as one big organism, like a big brain, and all of us, we're just single vessels in that brain. So we're just the
Oh yeah,
universe experiencing itself. So
that's
I am
cool.
you, you are me, we're all dogs and cats, and we're every person we've ever met or ever will meet, just
Yeah.
different interpretations of the universe experiencing itself through different perspectives.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Weird,
I
huh?
yeah, it is weird. And I can almost envision us like all these beings inside of this. And we're just trying to freaking make it here. Crazy
Yeah.
world.
So, what inspired you to pursue a career path in the spiritual industry?
Yeah, so basically it was me getting into recovery. Really enlightened me in my spirituality, believing in a higher power than myself. So I probably will quote some of the stuff that I've learned through the 12-step program. Um, but I think, I had some experience with my children's father and his mom. They were spiritual. And when I first met him was when I first started seeing like 1111. So that was like our number, like, and I never really experienced that or noticed it, those synchronicities, up until when I think back to it with him. But then really it came to be more so when I started in my recovery journey. So um, I started a support group for moms in recovery, and I had somebody come in and teach some Reiki. And I had my first experience of getting Reiki done in, I would say it was 2021. And I saw my third eye. And that was like such an awakening for me. Um, because I had heard about a third eye and I've heard about like people I've seen spirits before. So not by choice. I've shut that down because I was really scared when I saw them. But again, like this awakening for me, it's slowly happening, like things are transpiring that I cannot like say that, oh, that's a coincidence or whatever. Like it's happening for a reason. So clairvoyancy, audio, what is it? Clear audio. Like hear things, intuition. I can feel things. But yeah, so for me, it was more so started when I became sober and really got more into learning about holistic healing. So that was, just being aware of feelings, being aware of myself, being aware that we are more than just a working machine on this planet. And recognizing like my needs and my wants. And I went back to school for social service work in Ontario. And it was a really reflective course, but it also opened up my eyes to where my passion lies. And so for me, when I'm helping others or being of service, counseling, I get these shots. It's like electrifying inside of me. And to me, that is God speaking through me, making me know that I'm on the right path. And this is where my passion is because it's like this like goosebumps throughout my whole body, but it's just me helping someone, you know? But I get these experiences, and then that for me is like that's how I know I'm on the right path. That's how I know I'm on my soul's journey because on the right path of my soul's journey. Because it's like those are the feel good feelings
Hmm.
that I get. They're the God shots.
I
Sorry,
can
that was
relate to that.
long-winded, but
No, 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 not at all. That's exactly the kind of answer I was looking for. And I can relate because sometimes I feel like when I'm doing the quote unquote right thing, so like living in service of others, being healthy, being disciplined, trying to manage my I guess my baser desires for like, gluttony and whatnot. When I'm doing all the right things, I start seeing more of these synchronicities. And for those of you who aren't familiar, of all the two people who might actually end up watching this podcast, I it's just like little tiny miracles, like little like once in a million events that happen like right in front of your eyes. And one of them isn't that significant, but it's when you start seeing several over and over again that you got to start kind of questioning, like, okay, hang on,
yeah,
like that many like once in a million things, and it could be as little as like, you're a bird landing on your finger or on your shoulder or something, and then this
I get
bird just happens
feathers.
to be the favorite bird of something else. It might have some symbolic significance, but it's a roundabout way of saying when I'm doing the right thing, I start seeing a lot more synchronicities. And when I'm kind of turning my back on God or myself, then it almost seems like these go dark. And so I can
Yep.
relate with um, that experience. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like you described a really that's a nice snippet of your story of like finding yourself and finding your faith and your spirituality. But you did very briefly brush over seeing spirits and your third eye, and I think that's a very significant event. So would you care to describe what those experiences were like? Because those are things that I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people will never experience.
Yeah. And it's funny because I like so badly want to be aware. Like I want to be able to see spirits and communicate with the spirit world, but I also have this deep-seated fear that they are going to harm me or something like that. So that's basically when I was in my 20s. I moved out of my parents' house for a brief moment and moved into a house with my girlfriend, and her girls were in the bathtub, and they used to be like, "There's something here, there's something moving," and we're like, "Ah, you guys are just, like you're seeing things or whatever." But this one particular night, the lights were flickering on and off. They were in the bathtub, they were screaming, and I went into my bedroom afterwards, and I had done some photo shoots for this modeling agency years ago. And all of the pictures I had up in my room, and they weren't in a frame. So they were just kind of sitting there on the shelves, and all four of them were tipped over on the floor and bent in one corner, all on the same side. And these are $700 photos. Like I would not ever have them tipped over and like bent, you know what I mean? So that was like that was one of the first times that we like experienced some kind of haunting, as you would say. And then I remember I was getting ready we were going out to the bar, and I was doing my makeup, and I looked in the mirror, and there's this man. He's an Amish man with like the big hat, black cloak, big beard. And I was like, well, I was like, oh my gosh, I just saw this man. because I turned back and there's nobody there. And I looked back in the mirror and he wasn't there. So that was my first experience ever seeing a, a spirit, right? And it like gives me goosebumps to this day. So in 2021, before I moved out here, I saw a medium and she brought this man back. She said he was with me. So I don't know who he is, but he again showed himself. And she's like, does this person, like, does this relate to you? And I'm like, I saw that person years ago. She's like, I don't know why he's coming back up into your life. She's like, but anyway, she's like, he's here with you. And I got the heebie-jeebies from it, right? Like, um, and then so, there's other things like my grandfather coming through to different mediums, friends, parents who were mediums, and they're like, you might want to sit down for this. And then they would tell me things that this also helped me with my spirituality as well. So when I was after my grandfather passed away, I was 9 years old, and I saw him in my dream, and he scared the shit out of me in my dream. Told me to never talk about his sickness again because I was one of the last people to see him before he passed. And so that face that he had always stuck with me, right? Like he was so sick, he was not awake, like so it always stuck with me. But when I saw him in my dream, I kind of was like so scared. But in my active addiction, I used to pray to my grandfather and be like, or even just, I knew that he could see me and I knew that he was watching me, but I would also be like, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like I promise, I would make promises to his spirit that I wouldn't do it anymore. But I didn't really understand what I was doing back then. I was I was about 18, 19 around that time that I was like heavily into my addiction. Um, but yeah, so like even like I said, my friend's mom, she mentioned like white butterflies. And all I saw, like all I would see in the summertime were these white butterflies. Now they might be like a moth kind of butterfly or a moth or something, but to me it looks like a white butterfly. And they'd always be flying around me. And I mentioned it and I said, this is my grandfather. But she wouldn't have known. And she brought it up to me one night and said, that's your grandfather. I saw another medium one time and she
Huh.
mentioned, yeah, she was like, who's singing? I'm a little teapot. And I'm like, I do that with my daughter. And she's like, no, that this man is here with you singing. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was my grandfather. He's with us when
Ooh.
were doing that, right? So that's part of like my awakening of spirituality. I have my family who is like, I'm starting to awaken them a little bit more, but they are like, no, non-believers, very close-minded. Um, but then so yeah, the Reiki thing. Uh, she was just going around us and we were all sitting in a circle with our eyes closed and she was behind me and I don't know what she was doing. Like usually Reiki, you're just putting your hands out, but I just felt like this like burning hot on my back. And when I closed my eyes, I just saw this like eye and it had like it was so beautiful and it just had this like almost like it's eyelashes, but it's not. It was like artwork of like just this like awareness of like beautiful. I don't know. It was just so cool for me. Um, and so when she did that, I was like, oh my gosh, I just saw my third eye. Like this is crazy. And to say like I still don't see things. Like I still am closed, like the veil is lifted, but it's still pretty because I'm scared, right?
Mm.
But um I do believe that spirits are with us and that they give us signs, right? So I get signs from Vance, the kid's dad, all the time. He's with us all the time. So leaving us hearts everywhere we go since he's passed away. I never like I didn't think about them when we separated. I didn't think about the hearts that we used to see. So we used to see rocks with heart shapes, clouds of heart shapes. And like I remember finding this little seashell and it had this little tiny heart in it. And after he passed, I started seeing hearts everywhere. And same with the kids. So I was like, again, there's no coincidences. Um, they're with us. the spirits are with us, but it's just up to us to believe. So if we believe it, we'll receive it. That's I like to say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, when people, do you, first of all, do you like share this openly with most people, or just when people come to you and ask you about such experiences?
I share it when people ask. Yeah.
Yeah, because I can relate with what you're saying about, trying to facilitate the spiritual awakening of others. And Epictetus, I don't know, I don't know how to say that name, but Epictetus, but he says it in his teachings, that when you begin your path, your spiritual journey, people are gonna look at you and they're gonna laugh at you because they don't understand the journey that you're on. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to kind of induce those kind of awakenings to other people. And to people that haven't seen the significance or the repetitiveness of these signs, they might discount it as something like confirmation bias, where you're looking for the sign, and of course you're going to train your eye to see these things. But
Yeah.
as somebody who's seen a lot of these synchronicities as well, it's like, again, it's not one or two, but just the abundance of repetitiveness with these, that has the significance. And
Yeah.
regarding the third eye, you said like it was open but then it's closed. And the in that book I recommended, the Flower of Life book, he talks a lot about like the earlier humans and how we used to have our third eye, or pineal gland, used to be the size of a golf ball, but due to modern lifestyles, it's now
Yeah.
shrunk down to the size of a dried pea, and its
Wow.
functionality has reduced dramatically, like proportionately to its size decrease, right?
Yep.
um, I have noticed though, like one of my favorite meditation practices is to focus on that space between my eyes. And it's almost like there's a little muscle you can flex there. And you can like
Yeah.
yeah, you can like feel it. Now, I don't know. I can't say definitively if that is the third eye or the pineal gland, or if it's just a nerve center, or if I'm just convincing myself that I'm feeling something. But
Right.
whether it's a manifestation of my spirituality or just a sensation that I'm convincing myself I'm feeling, I've
Yeah.
noticed that when I'm stressed out, when I'm anxious, when my mind is racing, when I resort to that, regardless of what the situation is, I find that it brings me into the moment, and it kind of quiets down what I call the monkey mind, which is like,
Right.
no matter how much I try to stuff it away, it just keeps on babbling in my ear.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Because it's like, yeah, you're just taking the focus off of everything else and bringing it back to, that one spot in your mind too. So it makes sense to me that it would, you would be able to quiet your mind, but also, yeah, I don't know. I think it's very interesting, this whole conversation.
Yeah, weird. It's like, but it's also been called the like the portal to the spiritual realm
Well, that's
by
it.
certain spiritual teachers.
Yeah. And that's why, like, I have this deck of cards downstairs. My friend just sent it to me, and I should have brought it upstairs. I even saw it before I came up. And now that we're talking about this, like when I opened the cards, it's exactly what I saw in my when my eyes were closed. And like you said, some people may think like, oh, it's a coincidence, or you're just visualizing it or whatever, but I've never seen it before. I've never ever seen that before. And I've tried to see it. I'm like,
Yeah.
and that first time getting Reiki, and I was awakened when I did my Reiki level 3, my Reiki master course. I did it online, and I just have to share because this is like pretty powerful. So gold is like the color of the divine, and it brings about a certain level for the Reiki as well, a Reiki master. And so when I was doing my Reiki level 3 attunement, I had lied down on my bed and she was doing it. And I almost like I went into this deep meditative state. But when she did the attunement, whatever she was doing with her hands, I saw gold. I was covered in gold. So then I was like, what does that mean? And I reached out to my other friend who's a Reiki master, and then another friend too, and they both said the same thing. It's the connectedness. the connectedness to the divine. So I was like, wow, that's pretty special. I felt like I just went above my healing journey that I never thought that I would get that experience, right? So
And this was
that's exciting.
during your level 3 attunement, which is, I imagine, one of the more difficult or one of the higher graduated levels.
Yeah.
And this
So I
is
get to teach.
a completely unprovoked, uninfluenced, you might even say an uneducated vision that you've had, and yet it
Yep.
came to you and it has such a spiritual significance to
Yeah.
that phase of your development. Because now you get to
Yeah.
pass this gift along to other people, which I imagine would be more or less a skill or an ability that's reserved for people of a certain echelon in the field.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's I think it's pretty special that I was gifted that, overall awareness to see and to be open and receive. So I was so excited afterwards.
Yeah, I can only
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah,
So this is like a rabbit hole that we could go down forever and ever with an unlimited amount of tangent possibilities. And I do hope that we get to do that. But with the limited amount of time that we have together, I don't think it would be fair to you or to the viewers or listeners if we didn't provide a little bit of backstory from where
yeah,
you came from, because you mentioned a few times now your recovery and your active addiction. Um,
yep,
but before we jump into the meat and potatoes of that, I'd like to go back a little bit further
yep.
and get a little bit of backstory on Krystal. So, for starters, where are you from originally?
Yeah, so originally I'm from a small town called Innisfil, Ontario. It's by Lake Simcoe, literally like a 5 minute walk, not even 2 minute walk to the beach, excuse me,
Okay,
from my parents' house. And I grew up there. It was always such a great time living there by the beach, being a beach babe for my whole life. Basically, I stayed there till I was 26 years old at my parents' house.
nice. Well, why would you leave if you got everything taken care of?
Right? That was it. My parents didn't kick me out. So,
Cool.
but
So I want to say that when we do get a little bit further in, you can say specific names of substances should you choose to. Don't feel pushed to, but also don't feel like you got to rush through the story if we don't get it all in. You're more than welcome to come back for a second episode. But
okay.
what was your childhood like up until from I guess early as you can remember to 26 years old? Did you come
Yeah.
from a happy family? Were your parents together? Were they nurturing?
Yeah. So my family was together. Like my parents are still together. It's 444 right now.
Oh, neat.
440. I just looked down. Um, and so my parents were still together. They are still together. Um, I grew up, uh, my parents would have friends over, they would party. I remember like being a little kid. I have a twin brother and an older sister. And I just have I have fond memories of like everybody coming over to our house and partying until the late night. And um, like that was kind of embedded in me at a very young age that to have fun, we were to drink and to like turn up the music loud and have kitchen parties. And so my family, my mom's side of the family is originally from Newfoundland. So it's a lot of like that kind of East Coast guitars and music and just jamming out and having fun. My mom and dad, I can't remember too much from my childhood, to be honest. And I don't know if that's because I've shut that down. There's some things that have come back up this year that like I could remember myself as a small child sitting in my room bawling my eyes out because I got in trouble for something, right? And like oftentimes it was met with yelling or getting spanked, um, sworn at or whatever. So it was like, and I wish I could remember about my mom. Like I don't remember too much. She was more of the nurturer, and my dad was very old. He pushed me away kind of thing. Like he did do fun things with us. So I don't want to say that he was a terrible father the whole time, but there was things where it's like he had a father wound. And I can see it now, but it really affected me. I remember being like 14 and 15 and being like, I love you. And he wouldn't say it back to me. And I get so hurt and so offended by that, that it carried with me for a lot of years. Like it still affects me, the relationship that I have with my dad. It's not what I would hope for it to be. And he's not even capable of being that emotionally intelligent man that I need, you know? So I oftentimes like jumping forward, I oftentimes search for people who are emotionally unavailable. So it shows up in my adulthood as well. I can recognize that now. When I was younger, I couldn't, but yeah. And like I said, I have a twin brother. So we had a pretty good relationship as kids. We had totally different personalities. I was very outgoing. He was very shy and quiet, and very much wanted to be like my dad. So when we got into our teenage years, we butt heads quite a bit, quite a bit. So, and I had an older sister who she was 9 years older than me, and her and I's relationship from she moved out when I think she was 17. Excuse me. So I was only like, it was just after my grandfather died. So I was only like 9. Excuse me. And it really affected me. I felt detached from her for a long time. And yeah, that was a challenge in itself. And I blame my dad for that. She left because of my dad. It's not her dad. So it, basically it was, I thought it was a good family dynamic, but I could see now that there was some wounds for a lot of people. Like my mom had wounds, my dad had wounds, and they have never been healed. Yeah.
Okay. I find it interesting that so you seem to remember more about your relationship with your father. Was that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Um, did your mom have a tendency to abuse you, either verbally or physically? Did you get into a lot of fights with her? Was this a
I got
frequent
to
thing?
I got into more fights with my dad than my mom. I think my mom was more the safe place. Like I can talk to my mom about anything, and I did share with my mom a lot of different things. I can remember when I was like going through some of like the pretty hard times of my active addiction and just sharing with her like what happened. But it took me a while because I was fearful of my mom. She put the fucking fear of death in me at times because she could be scary, right? Like
Hmm.
she could yell at me and she could use physical force on me too. So like she scared me. I didn't want to fuck with my mom, you know?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It might have been a good judgment call.
Yeah.
What was school like? Did you have a lot of friends? Were you academically successful?
So in public school, yes, I wasn't the popular child, as one would say, but I did have a good group of friends. I was pretty much a straight A student all the way up till grade 8. And then grade 9 hit and I changed. I went from being this like little good girl, as one would say, like a good girl conditioning, always following the rules, never really getting into too much trouble. I didn't partake in like drugs or drinking or anything like that. My parents really tried to shelter me from that after a while, but I, grade 9, I started getting more attention from guys, so my looks changed. I started to become a little bit more mature within my body, and so then, yeah, I was getting attention that I never received before, and it felt good. And so I started skipping school. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. We started drinking and partying, smoking weed, listening to Dr. Dre and all those old school gangster songs. And, I just started to become a totally different person than I ever was. So I didn't graduate from high school. I still have never got my grade 12. Um, and like I went to my brother's graduation and I was supposed to graduate with same year as him, right? But I didn't. And yeah, so I skipped a lot of school. I ended up getting kicked out of school a couple of times because I didn't show up for so many days. So they were like, well, you're not, you're not coming. So what's the point of having you registered? Yeah,
Do you think you would have been less influenced by the attention you received from men if your father had been more present emotionally?
probably, to be honest. Probably. I think that really had a big effect on me because I often didn't feel loved, right? And like I said, he didn't tell me he loved me. So I was seeking outside validation and I didn't even realize it, at the time that that's what I was doing, going for much older men and getting that attention. And yeah, it was pretty crazy because I was like 16 dating a 21-year-old.
Hmm.
So
And I
yeah,
think that goes to show the lasting impact that um, not taking care to develop yourself emotionally before raising a child or even while raising a child can have. Because
yeah,
not even just not finishing school, but the reason you weren't finishing school is now you're developing unhealthy attachments to men who likely are involved for the wrong reasons. I can't
right.
think of too many healthy, nurturing reasons for a 21-year-old man to be dating a 16-year-old,
Correct. Right. Yeah.
right? And
I agree.
so this might be an assumption I might be reaching here, but around this time, is this when you started to pick up drinking and maybe other drugs?
Yeah. So 14 was when I first, like the summer of my, like going into grade nine is when I first like picked up alcohol and kind of had a feel for it, like, and then 15 is when I started drinking and smoking weed. And I also got bullied in that time as well because I became a little bit more sexually active. And it's like some of the girls found out, so they started calling me a slut, and like it just spiraled, right? So how quick the word of mouth gets spread, and then people really that I thought were my friends really made me feel like a piece of shit for experimenting. And it put a label on me that didn't wasn't true. Um, and it hurt. So I think then I started hanging out with a different friend group altogether. And these people, um, they did heavier drugs. So I went from drinking and smoking a little bit of weed to taking a hit of acid when I was 15. Um, and that changed my whole perspective on life. Like I was like, wow, life is amazing being high. Tripping out and seeing things, hallucinating and laughing for hours on end was a whole new way to experience life. And I was so having so much fun. Like I was loving it, right? But those things quickly turned from doing having that acid trip to then trying out different drugs, so harder drugs, ecstasy. And and then it progressed into cocaine. And so like I remember doing ecstasy for days on end. And like this one time I couldn't eat anymore and I couldn't sleep. And I was like, I never want to feel like this again. So I stopped doing ecstasy. And I don't even know how long it was later is when I tried cocaine. It was a couple of weeks later. My ex-boyfriend was like, oh, why don't you try it? It's kind of like E, but it's not. I was so scared to try it. And when I tried it, I loved it. I was like, oh, this is awesome because you got that rush. You got like it didn't last for fucking hours. Um, but it was, yeah, it was interesting because it quickly progressed into like a heavy duty addiction at that point in time. And I think I was about 17 around that time when I started to like try cocaine. And like I said, it quickly progressed. And by like 18, full blown, doing it every single day. My ex-boyfriend was a dealer. This older man was a dealer as well. And yeah, it was just like an everyday thing. And I found out he cheated on me and I was like, oh, the bag is mine. And I just went downhill. I was like 90 pounds soaking wet. Um, it was bad. Like I don't even know how my parents didn't know that this is what was happening, but I would do coke at home in my bedroom. I would hide out. I'd be at work for days and over at his place, and some heavy shit happened to us as well, right? So we got robbed at gunpoint and they found me in the closet and tied me up and gagged me and all this craziness, right? And so I did, my niece broke my nose shortly after that. Um, and so when I went to the hospital, I went like 7 days later, and the doctor was pissed that I went so late because my nose could have healed. But he told my parents, and this is when he told my parents that I was doing cocaine. And at this time, I was 19 years old. So he broke the patient confidentiality.
That's a
But I
massive
didn't,
breach. That's a fireable offense nowadays. A doctor can lose their license and catch a massive lawsuit.
right? And I didn't even know that back then because I was so naive. I missed a whole part of life because I just partied for so long, right? And yeah, basically after that, that's when my mom was like, okay, so how long have you been doing coke for? And that's when the truth came out, right? Um, and shortly after I got arrested and called my sister and told her what happened, and she's like, if you continue to do this, you're never going to see your niece and nephew again. And that was like my turning point there. I was like, okay, I'm done with this guy. I have to end this relationship. I have to um move forward. And I didn't want to lose my niece and nephew. They were my whole world. I would take them for weekends and stuff, so I didn't go and party with people. Like I was trying to change my life. Um, and yeah, I went from like 100, or I was 90 pounds and I went to 130 pounds within like a 2 month span. I just went poof. And then I started getting more attention because then I had boobs, I got a butt, and I looked way better. Um, yeah, and then it progressed into alcoholism. So I I went from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Yeah, that was like my progression, and then I still continued using cocaine all the way up until I was in my 30s, and I did different stints of like I said, moved I lived with my parents until I was 26, and then I moved to Alberta and then came out here and tried to make it work out here. For a couple of years I ended up going to Fort McMurray, and the whole lifestyle with bikers and drugs followed me again. So it was always surrounding me. And it was like, that's what I was attracting in my life because that's what I felt like life was a big, huge party. Um, Up until, it was like, until I got pregnant. That's when things really, really changed for me is the pregnancy with my daughter because I couldn't drink and party anymore, right? Um, I was carrying another human being, but I didn't get into recovery until 2020, the year 2020, December. Yeah. So it was almost 19 years of using actively different, mostly cocaine and alcohol.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, thank you for that all that backstory.
Yeah.
Um, so your first time being handed alcohol, was that with one of your girlfriends, or was that from a man that you had a romantic interest with?
It was from one of my girlfriends. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then later, because then you started changing your attention to kind of feeding off of this new attention that you were getting, and you said that it started to spiral. So that's like you started to use alcohol with men, and then women were slut shaming you,
Yep.
so for lack of a better term,
Yep.
and then that kind of made you turn off from having those kinds of relationships with women and dig deeper into those relationships with men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt more safety with men. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you found out that your boyfriend, the dealer, cheated on you, you kept the
Yeah.
bag, and did you stay with this man, or is that when you left?
Yep. Oh, I stayed with him for another year. Yeah. It was another
Okay.
year. me staying with him because I was like, well, you did that, the bag is mine. And then I just did all his coke. Like, it was stupid.
And how did that go? Other than that, other than their
Not
relationship.
well.
So other than the fact that he
No,
cheated on you, how unhealthy or healthy was this relationship?
it
Was
was
there
totally unhealthy because, he also was smoking crack at this time. So it was like I stuck with just doing coke, like doing lines, but I didn't get into that because I saw how quickly everybody progressed and I was like, man, I don't want to do this. But it became super toxic. He was a whole new person that I didn't really know, became abusive. We were both abusive towards each other as well. So those kind of things were coming up. Physical violence too. And like, I remember begging for his attention, and he was just so messed up, he couldn't give it to me. So, also within that, after I left him and I started getting attention again from men, like, I just started becoming what people told me I was before, you know? So, became very promiscuous and using men and getting what I wanted in a sense. So, yeah, it wasn't a good thing.
fair
Yeah,
enough? And so you still stayed with him for what was the total duration of the relationship? It was over a year. Was it 2 years, 3 years?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And
So
how
I was
long?
16 till 21,
Wow.
or 16 to, yeah, 21. Yeah.
This
five
was
years
your
with him.
first significant period of time in a relationship.
Yeah.
And was it healthier at the beginning or was it pretty toxic right from the get-go?
It was pretty toxic from the get-go. It was like, what the hell was I thinking? Like I wasn't thinking. And at the time when I first started dating him, he lied to me about his age. Um, and he just basically was telling his friends that he was going to get with me. He's like, I'm going to get with her, you know what I mean? And he got with me. And yeah, he ended up becoming very obsessed with me afterwards. And, we tried to be friends for a long time after, but the drugs just got the best of him. I don't even know where he's at today, but yeah, like I developed a really unhealthy relationship with him, but I had good relationship with his family. Like his family loved me. They still like me. You know what I mean? I don't communicate with them, but if I was to see them, it would be, oh my gosh, so cool to see each other again, right? So
Okay.
yeah, but him and I don't talk to him. I don't even know where he is. I hope he's okay though. Yeah.
Okay. So you broke off that relate or you left that relationship to maintain contact with your nieces and your other family. And
Yeah.
that seemed to be a very good thing for you because you started putting on weight, you became healthier, and you said you started getting even more attention from men. And shortly after that, you went to Fort McMurray. Now, what
Yeah.
brought you to Fort McMurray? As a now healthier woman, did you go work on the oil sands, or did you maybe follow somebody else up there?
I went with a couple of girlfriends who moved out from Ontario. So I was in Calgary first for 8 months, and then they were like, let's go out to Fort Mac. We're gonna go drive rock trucks.
Rock trucks.
Yeah, rock trucks, those big 757 trucks, right? Like we totally had this grand plan that we were gonna go drive these trucks,
You had life figured out.
had it all figured out, and then we got out there and my friend started working at the strip club. Like she got a job right away at Showgirls. And I went out with them one night, and everybody was high. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, let me get high. And so I ended up like, it was a shit show out there, to be honest. So I ended up getting a job working for a guy who worked for, who was part of Hell's Angels. And I ran his bar. Like I fully committed to taking care of this person's bar. And I was there from like 11 a.m. until close every single day, 7 days a week. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I was so determined to take care of this person's bar and help this person out because he was a biker and like whatever, whatever I thought back then, right? And I thought like they really respected me. So I was getting these feelings of, again, like validation, acceptance, respect. And, it wasn't till the bar shut down that I ended up getting another job. And um, yeah, so I ended up working at a few bars there. And then the last job was working at the Newfie Club as a cook. And I ended up dating a guy out there, and he and I didn't mesh well. He was very much would waste his whole paycheck on buying some crack and taking off and then leaving me alone. So it was very lonely at the end. And I called my parents basically after a huge fight with him and asked them if I could come back home. And that's when I traveled back home. So I was in Fort Mac for 11 months.
Okay, so hold on. You just said you and him didn't mesh well. So what on earth kept the relationship together?
Drugs,
Wow.
drugs and alcohol. I was the
How
partying,
unfortunate.
right?
So
Yeah.
now I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here.
Yeah.
Your first significant relationship was largely drug fueled. You left it because the drugs became a problem and the relationship was toxic, but ultimately what caused you to leave was losing your family. Then you went out to Fort McMurray with your drive and ambition, had life by the balls. You and your girlfriend were again, you and your friends against the world, and you were gonna win. And then drugs became involved. And I imagine the fact that your family wasn't in the immediate vicinity
Yeah.
probably made that decision a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because you didn't, the reason you sobered up is no longer a factor in your life. And so now you have free will to do what you want to do. And then went to another relationship, which was again toxic, then not friendly and drug fueled.
Yeah.
And then that didn't work out. But now instead of 6 years, 11 months, you realize this wasn't good for you. And it seems like maybe you have a little bit of wisdom. You learned some from your mistakes and you backed out of that before another 6 years was gone.
Right. Yeah,
Then you came
exactly.
back to Calgary to live with or back to BC.
Back to Ontario.
Ontario, right.
Yeah.
And back to live on the beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. And so then you came back knowing, did you realize at this point that drugs were becoming a problem again, or is this when you sobered up again, or did you try to
No,
hide it and continue using?
I tried to hide it and continued using. Like I remember, oh my gosh, I made such poor decisions. Like literally, I moved back home with my parents and I had like a guy come over that one night. We drank from that night, one night, and then drank the next day. And my mom came home from work and like he slept over and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like I just really made such poor decisions while I was under the influence. Um, and then so I ended up moving in with my girlfriend. Her and I got a house in Barrie together. So that's about a half an hour from my parents' house. And yeah, I was working. I went back to work with the newspaper. So some of the jobs that I had, I worked as a bartender for quite a few years, but then I also got hired on through Sun Media and I did newspaper layouts and classified pages. I had no idea what I was doing, but I got
How'd you get hired for that? That
my
came
sister,
completely out of nowhere.
right? My sister, she was the manager of Sun Media, general manager, and she got me a job doing it. So I had different like it was a pretty cool job. And that's how I got to Calgary is because I got a job transfer out to Calgary and worked for the Calgary Sun. But yeah, I ended up leaving there and going to Fort McMurray, right? So when I got back from Ontario, my sister, they gave me my job back. So I always left there and came back, which was awesome because I always left on good terms. So I was always able to get my job back. But this time around, I was like pretty much in victim mode. Nobody knew what I had gone through in Fort McMurray. Nobody really knew how much I was struggling, and I didn't really even notice it myself. I didn't know that I was suffering with mental health, right? I didn't realize that substance abuse stems from uh, usually a mental health underlying problem, right? So for me, um, I tried to. I tried to play it off like I was a victim, right? Like everybody did to me. You don't know what happened to me. I would continuously miss work, and they wrote me up, and they had mentioned, like continuing on like this, you're not going to be able to keep the job. So anyways, it still like it progressed. I left there, and by this time, I will share, when I moved in with my girlfriend, we had a fire one night, and her friend came over with this guy, and him and I sat by the fire and shot the shit for the whole night. And then he had like, we went out to sit in his truck and like smoke out there and whatever we talked. And anyways, it turned out to be my children's father. So we quickly started like messing around with each other, and our relationship too was addiction based. He was an alcoholic and I was an alcoholic. Both didn't recognize it at that time, but we would use drugs and alcohol together, and that's where our relationship, that's the commonality that we had. Um, and so quickly moved in with him after like, I think it was 9 months. Was it? No, maybe less than. I met him in like the summertime, and then we moved in together by December. So super fast. And 9 months after that, I was pregnant. Um, and now first I got pregnant, and I think it was around my birthday. So it was around April, and I lost the baby. The baby didn't form. And so I had to have like a DNC surgery. And anyways, we both had talked about continuing on, like trying to have another baby. And so we both agreed that we would. And 3 months later, then I got pregnant with Kennedy. And, I partied all the way up with him. We tried to run a business, like we bought a hot dog cart. We did so many different things together, but it all got ruined because of drugs and alcohol. So the drugs and alcohol were like the culprit of my demise, right? And so like I would miss work. And then with the hot dog cart, that business, like it ended up being a flop because I didn't have money to put in it. And he had this big idea, like, oh, we're gonna make it, we're gonna make it. And we just take the money that we made that day and go party. So it was really like stupid of us. And then so yeah, I got pregnant with Kennedy. And long story there, he continued to use within my pregnancy. And I I was pissed, right? Like I could see how addicted he was to alcohol, and like how he would act when he was drinking, that it became really tough for me. Like he locked me out of the house when I was 9 months pregnant. He flipped over the tables. He punched holes in the walls. It became really bad. Um, and I left for, I think it was or I threatened to leave. And I didn't leave, but I threatened to leave. Although I knew I probably should have left. Um, and I told him that, he didn't stop, then he wouldn't be coming to the hospital with me. And anyways, he stopped for the week. Um, before Kennedy was born. He was sober when Kennedy was born. And then, the day that we got home from the hospital, he went to the beer store and he bought us a beer. Like drank it in front of my parents. And my parents are like, what the fuck? Right. So quickly I got back into my addiction because I was watching him and I'm like, this is not fair. Why does he get to do this and I can't do this? And I really wanted to like do coke, and I went for months without doing it, and then I ended up doing it, and then I couldn't breastfeed Kennedy anymore, and all these other circumstances that it's not so much that I regret, it's just like I didn't learn. I didn't learn my lessons, and I didn't have any of that support because I wasn't reaching out for help. So, and then we got sober again. I ended up being like, I don't want to do this anymore. Kennedy was about 7 months old, and I sat there one night and I was really high in front of her, and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live my life like this. And so I quit then and there. But again, without any support. And he was sober for 6 months, but then quickly he relapsed and it just progressed so bad. Um, And that was hard for me. I ended up having to leave him because I couldn't take care of him. I was pregnant as well with our son. So yeah, there was a lot that happened in that time, and
So you left him while you were pregnant with your second child with him.
yeah, I did. Yeah, and Kennedy was a year old. So it was heavy. Yeah. And then we went
Okay.
through the court process and like so much shit. But then I relapsed. I went 2.5 years without using and I relapsed when Ocean was born. He was about 18 months old. So yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, no, that's good. We're getting a lot of really good backstory here. Your origin story. I
Yeah.
think I think it deserves to see the light of day because I think that what's important is not so much where you were, where you came from, but the fact that you're doing so well now, running a business. You've turned your life around, and you're doing all the things that people say they want to do, be a
Yeah.
good mom, be there for their kids, pursue their dreams. Um, but just to fill in a little gap in that story there, you had your relapse and you're sober now. So there was
Yeah.
something happened there. What happened at what point? What was the point in your relapse where you realized again, this is too much. I can't do this. I have to quit.
Yeah.
How old was Ocean? How long were you in your relapse for, and how did you do it? What was it like?
Yeah. So like I said, I relapsed. First I relapsed with alcohol and I didn't realize that alcohol was a problem for me. And so I drank for about a year after Ocean was born. And then it was just before my birthday in 2019, I think it was, that I ended up relapsing with cocaine. And I went out one night blackout drunk. So that relapse lasted 9 months. And for me, it was like, what am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this. I hated who I was. I couldn't even look in the mirror at myself after I had relapsed, right? And but the thing about addiction is how cunning, baffling, and powerful it is, right? So once I did that one line that one night, I didn't remember I did it, but my friend told me, and I couldn't get that thought out of my head. So I needed to try it again because I didn't remember doing it that night, right? So I had to try it again, and then anytime that I drank, I would start like I would want to do it. So it just went hand in hand together again. And I went back to school in 2019 for social service work. And I was like, all that I'm learning is like support work and social services and, working with people who are in addictions or child care and like taking child like foster systems and stuff like that. So I felt like I would be a hypocrite if I continued on this path and I'm trying to help others, but yet here I am and I can't even help myself. So I reached out to my old addiction counselor and I started counseling again. And that was I think it was November of 2019. So like I said, it lasted, I still continued on a little bit, but January of 2020 is the last time that I used cocaine. And I had ended up meeting somebody in school and he didn't do drugs. And so I was like, this is perfect. He doesn't drink, he doesn't do drugs. This is like my way out and away from this life, right? I basically, it sounds terrible, used him in a way to be able to have somebody who had that, like, they didn't have that commonality that I was so used to, right? Um, and our relationship only lasted 11 months, but I was still drinking here and there. And like I said, I started a support group for moms in recovery, and I got introduced to the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous in December of 2020. And I went to my very first meeting and I listened to what people were talking about. And I was like, holy fuck, this is me. Like, I really related to the people in these rooms and the stories that they had shared. So I then understood. I came to like that aha moment of like the allergy that we as addicts suffer from. Um, and the obsession of the mind. And it just started to click, and I started to understand addiction a little bit more. And I started to be like, okay, this is not what I want. So February 3rd or February 14th is my clean date from alcohol of 2021. So it took me a little bit from going into the rooms, then to, to getting full sobriety. But yeah, no, I just celebrated 3 years of sobriety. So
Wow,
that's super
congratulations.
exciting. I surpassed my previous clean time, so I'm pretty proud of myself. And I quit
That's
smoking.
that's a big accomplishment. How long have you been without smoking?
It's 2.5 years now. 2.5 years this month.
Tremendous.
Yeah, right?
And the method through which you quit smoking, you referred me to it, and I'm happy to say that today, actually, I checked my counter, is 4.5 months nicotine free for me as well. And
Yay!
I owe that entirely to you. So you have my infinite gratitude, and I owe you a debt of gratitude.
Thank you. Well,
Thank
I'm glad
you.
that I could help you. Yeah, right. Like it was, I found it. I found the app and it helped me so much. So I'll share that with the world.
Absolutely. Hey, I was so skeptical going into it, but it took so long for me to actually go for it. And even
Yep.
going through it, I'm like, this isn't gonna work. When this fails, I'm gonna go back to trying the sheer grit willpower. I'm gonna go back to trying the spray, the patches, anything and everything. And lo and behold, it worked like an absolute magical charm. So I'm
Right.
not going to say the name of the app because I'm not sponsored by them. I don't want any follow, but reach out to me. It changed my life, and Krystal shared it with me. So I will happily. I want to scream it from the rooftops. And
Right.
whenever somebody tells me they're trying to quit smoking, I refer them right to that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Changes your
basically,
neuroplasticity.
exactly. And of all the things that I've quit,
Yeah.
nicotine was by far the hardest. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you can relate, but it
It was.
wasn't like by a mile, not even close. And
Yeah.
this, yeah, and so this the way you introduced me to it just made it absolutely easy. I can't even count on all my fingers and toes how many times I've made it to 30 days and then thought I could have just one puff. And then it's
Right.
like literally I haven't even exhaled the first puff and I've already made the decision to go buy a pack or go buy a vape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how quick and progressive that even this the nicotine addiction is, right? Like and just learning what that app has to share about how smoking really affects our brains. It was such an awakening for me. I can honestly say that. Like, I never thought I'd quit smoking. Never. I smoked
Yeah.
for 19 years straight, every day, heavy a day smoker. I never tried to quit. Not even in my pregnancy. I tried so hard in my pregnancy to quit. I didn't even make it 24 hours. So I'm sorry to my family because I lied to y'all.
Well,
I couldn't fucking quit.
excuse me. Well, I mean, you if you decide later on you want that censored, we can do that. I don't want that to be the way the cat gets out of the bag if you're not comfortable with that.
Yeah,
But you know what though, learning going through that process, there's a remarkable amount of similarities between that and other addictions. Because you were talking about the allergy and the obsession, and like I want to be very careful and very clear to say that I am not a representative of any fellowship of any kind, but I am happy to share the experiences that I've had with everybody because, like I said, they've changed my life, and I think that they can offer a lot to the world. But like the even with nicotine, you have it's really only the 3 to 5 days that your nicotine receptors are even active. And
yeah,
then within 7 days, all your nicotine receptors have been emptied and deactivated. And yet and so that's when like all your cravings are gone.
yeah,
Supposedly your physical cravings. But
right.
then, like I said, I always made it 30 days. And then it's when as soon as I started thinking about it, I couldn't stop. That's that
Mm,
obsession.
yeah,
And then as soon as I had one puff, all those nicotine receptors were immediately activated. And then I picked up right back where I left off again.
right. Yeah, that would make sense. And that's how quickly that it can just click, right? Because your nicotine receptors is like once you have that one puff, it's going off. Ting, 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 ting,
And
ting.
they
I
never
want
go
more.
away.
No, they don't. They're there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty crazy.
we only have a few more minutes before you have to go do what you have to do.
Yeah,
But there is a something I want to ask, and I think it's important to ask this because um your opinion with what you've gone through is very relevant and very important, and it's regarding the whole slut shaming thing. And
yeah,
that has such an interesting history and a culture behind it. Um, because back in like if we think back to like the Renaissance, having premarital sex was like a cardinal sin, and
right.
people were stoned for that. um and then moving forward, there's the through events like the sexual revolution, the rock and roll, the roaring, what was it, the roaring 70s or 60s, and then
Yeah,
the second sexual revolution with through the rock and roll era, um with the invention of the mini skirt and all these things. It's like that we moved to an age of sexual liberty,
yeah,
and yet slut shaming was still very it was ubiquitous.
yeah,
Less so today, but more so maybe like even 10 to 20 years ago, it was all over
yep.
the place. And I have a hard time thinking that you would say that it had a positive effect on you.
Yeah, no, not at all. It didn't have a positive effect on me at
Yeah.
all to be shamed for experimenting, right? That's what it was. And yeah, I don't know. It was just I felt very like spotlighted when it came to that. Like, and it was one mistake that led to me being bullied. And essentially I was bullied for experimenting, right?
And then you said that it just resulted you coped with it by you started to believe what you were to being called, and then you really started to live by the this bracket that you were placed in. Um
Yeah,
Even though you didn't believe it originally, because like you said, you were just experimenting. And
yeah.
so looking back with your experience and your wisdom and your knowledge that you have today, what is your current stance on things like premarital sex, casual sex, or experimenting at a younger age? Do you think that people should be free to do what they want with who they want, guilt free? Do you think that there is still some value in abstaining for certain periods, if not until marriage?
Yeah, so I think it depends on who the person is, right? And what they believe in and their own beliefs. But as for me, like as a mom, especially thinking about my children and when they become experimental, like I'm not gonna my family was very much like prudes in the sense of like also shutting it down, trying to, but I feel like we are human, we are sexual creatures as well, right? So I don't feel like abstaining till marriage is legitimate or like feasible for me. I ruined that when I was 15, but I going forward, I think that just being mindful because now I have a different understanding of sex, right? Back then it was like the feel good, get the attention, whatever seeking that I was doing. And like nowadays for myself, it's more so you got to be careful, right? Because it's an energy exchange too. So having that more of a spiritual aspect to it is like, I mean, everyone each to their own. Everyone can have fun. Everyone can, but I don't know. It's that's a pretty tricky topic to talk about, I think. But with my own experience, I wouldn't wait until marriage. Like, no.
Yeah, I agree. It is a very tricky topic because
Yeah,
the like I something that I've noticed is that sexual oppression or any kind of oppression leads to rebellion. And then
exactly.
like for I don't know about you, but I came from a household of don't ask, don't tell. Like, why would you ask about drugs? Are you planning on becoming a drug addict? And then
Right.
the limitation of this information caused me to want to go and find it out on my own terms. And then it went from being hyper villainized in my house to trying it once, realizing I'm not dead, I'm not addicted after one use, I've been lied to, and now I want to overindulge in this thing.
Right.
When if I had been explained it originally, I'm not saying I necessarily would have been different, but maybe there's a possibility that I wouldn't have had the as intense of an interest in it after my first exposure to it, realizing it wasn't this boogeyman that I was told. And so I think it's similar with sexual oppression. We're told that
Yep.
there's all these horrible things, then we try it and realize it's not the end of the world. Maybe now people are more inclined to overindulge in it because they've been
Right.
repressing this part in their head.
Well,
However,
for sure.
on the flip side of that, with our new state of the art of psychology and brain scans, MRIs, fMRIs, CAT scans, and our knowledge of things like oxytocin, vasopressin, all of these hormone chemicals, we can see that, like you said, it's an energy exchange. And
Yeah.
every time that we have sex, we release all these bonding hormones. And
Yeah.
with then we were talking about neuroplasticity, our brain learns from our own experiences. So if we have these repeated bonding experiences with different partners and we don't build on that bond, we don't reaffirm that bond with a lasting connection, then
Right.
it's possible that now our brain is going to learn and adapt to release less of these bonding hormones with each repeated encounter. And then when we
Hmm.
want to have that connection, it's going to be that much harder to build that connection with somebody.
I wonder if that's what's happened for me.
Well, I cannot confirm nor deny,
No,
but I wonder if maybe that was the basis of the spiritual rule of the, oh sorry, I should say, of the religious rules that were placed
yeah,
down of you cannot have sex before marriage, because maybe they were aware of this uh
yeah,
and
maybe.
and they weren't either divulging this information to the public, or maybe they knew it in their soul, but they didn't know how to express it. And so they just said, just
Right.
don't do it. But
Yeah.
that's just, so I wanted to get your opinion on that because, somebody who's suffered through the negatives of slut shaming and then did an overcorrection and then another overcorrection as you learn who you are. And
Yeah.
I guess that's our time. And we have so much more to talk about if you ever do
Yeah.
choose to come back
I would love
onto this
to.
show. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did because I had an absolute delight.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, is there anything else that you would like to any closing statements?
I think that you have a marvelous mind, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It was really awesome to just, you know what, open up and be authentically um authentically myself and being honest of my struggles and, like the things that I experienced in life, because maybe of the two people who watch this, it might help somebody know that they are not alone. And we all suffer in our own ways, but like by sharing our stories, we don't have to feel that alone anymore. And we can feel heard and, seen. And I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of people is to be seen and heard. So yeah, thanks for giving me the space.
That was beautifully well said. And I want to thank you for, first of all, those very kind words. They are very much appreciated, but also for your openness and your honesty and your willingness to be vulnerable in this conversation, because we touched on
Yeah.
some pretty sensitive topics. Um, but also, I want to assure you that the honor and the privilege was all mine.
Well, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, you have an excellent rest of your evening. I will keep in touch, and I can't wait for this to be completed in post-production.
Yeah, no, let me know.
Absolutely. Okay, Crystal, thank
Okay.
you again. You have a great rest of your day.
You
Chat
too,
soon.
Eric. Thank you.
Bye.